Welcome to Philosophy for Sleep, where ancient wisdom meets restful contemplation. Tonight, we're settling into the gentle embrace of Stoic philosophy through the teachings of one of Rome's most profound thinkers, Lucius Annaeus Seneca, a man who understood both the heights of imperial power and the depths of human struggle, left us letters and essays that still whisper comfort across the centuries. As you find your most comfortable position, perhaps adjusting your pillow or pulling a blanket closer, know that you don't need to memorize anything tonight. You don't need to take notes or stay alert for a test tomorrow morning. This is simply a quiet journey through ideas that have helped countless souls find peace, purpose, and perspective. Let Seneca's words wash over you like a warm bath, soothing the edges of whatever concerns have followed you into this moment. Before we begin our gentle exploration, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked into bed in a cozy apartment in Prague as midnight approaches? Or perhaps you're winding down on a sofa in Vancouver while rain taps against your window? Maybe you're listening from halfway around the world where the sun is setting and the day's responsibilities are finally releasing their grip. Drop a comment and let this small community of nighttime philosophers know where you are. There's something beautifully human about sharing these quiet moments across time zones and continents. Now, settle deeper into your space. This video is for relaxation and educational purposes only, not meant as a substitute for professional guidance or medical advice. Simply let yourself be present with these ancient teachings, allowing them to offer whatever comfort or insight feels right for this moment. Seneca lived nearly 2,000 years ago, yet his words feel remarkably fresh when we need them most. He was born into wealth but understood poverty. He advised emperors but never forgot the struggles of ordinary people. He faced exile, political turmoil, and ultimately death with a dignity that still inspires. Most importantly for our purposes tonight, he understood that philosophy wasn't meant to be an academic exercise locked away in dusty libraries. Philosophy for Seneca was medicine for the soul. In his letters to his younger friend Lucilius, Seneca created what might be history's first self-help correspondence. But unlike the frantic energy of modern self-improvement, his guidance carries the weight of hard-won wisdom. These weren't theories written by someone who had never faced real hardship. They were practical tools forged in the fires of actual experience, tested against the full spectrum of human joy and suffering. What makes Seneca's teachings particularly soothing for our modern minds is his gentle realism. He doesn't promise that life will be easy if you just think positively enough. He doesn't suggest that following his advice will eliminate all problems from your existence. Instead, he offers something more valuable and more honest. He shows us how to find steadiness in the midst of uncertainty, how to discover meaning in both pleasure and pain, and how to cultivate an inner refuge that no external circumstance can truly disturb. Tonight, we'll explore several of his most comforting insights. We'll consider his thoughts on the nature of time and how understanding its passage can bring us peace rather than anxiety. We'll examine his gentle approach to dealing with anger, worry, and the countless small irritations that can accumulate throughout our days. We'll discover his perspective on friendship, solitude, and the delicate balance between engaging with the world and maintaining our inner tranquility. Seneca believed that every day offered opportunities for growth, but not in the exhausting way we sometimes imagine self-improvement must happen. His version of daily progress was more like tending a garden. Some days you plant seeds, other days you water what's already growing, and sometimes you simply sit quietly and appreciate what has already bloomed. There's no rushing the seasons, no forcing outcomes, just a steady, patient attention to what's within your influence. One of his most beautiful insights concerns the relationship between acceptance and action. Many people mistakenly believe that accepting difficult circumstances means becoming passive or resigned. Seneca understood something more nuanced. True acceptance, he taught, actually frees us to respond more wisely. When we stop fighting reality itself, we can direct our energy toward the responses that might actually help. This doesn't mean becoming doormat or abandoning our values. It means distinguishing between the storm and our response to the storm. We cannot control the weather, but we can choose how we navigate through it. We cannot control other people's actions, but we can choose our own. We cannot control the passage of time, but we can choose how we spend the moments we're given. As we journey deeper into his teachings tonight, you might notice how Seneca's wisdom operates like a gentle current rather than a forceful wave. His insights don't demand immediate transformation or dramatic life changes. Instead, they invite us into a different relationship with our own experience. A relationship characterized by curiosity rather than judgment, by patience rather than urgency, by compassion rather than harsh self-criticism. Seneca wrote extensively about the art of living well, but his definition of living well might surprise you. It wasn't about accumulating achievements or reaching some final state of perfection. Living well, for Seneca, was about showing up fully to whatever life presented, maintaining your integrity regardless of external circumstances, and cultivating the kind of inner strength that could weather any storm while still remaining open to beauty, connection, and joy. He understood that we are all students in the school of experience, and that our curriculum includes both pleasant and unpleasant lessons. The goal isn't to graduate from difficulty, but to become more skillful in our responses to whatever arises. Some days, the lessons are gentle, like watching sunlight move across a wall or sharing laughter with a friend. Other days, the curriculum is more challenging, requiring us to find grace in the midst of loss, patience in the face of frustration, or courage when we feel afraid. What made Seneca such a masterful teacher was his recognition that these challenging lessons, while never welcome, often carry the most profound opportunities for growth. Not because suffering is inherently good, but because our responses to difficulty can reveal reserves of strength and wisdom we didn't know we possessed. Like a muscle that grows stronger through gentle resistance, our capacity for peace and resilience can deepen through thoughtful engagement with life's inevitable challenges. This evening, as we explore his letters and essays together, we're not looking for quick fixes or simple solutions. We're allowing ourselves to be influenced by a mind that understood both the complexity of human experience and the profound simplicity that can emerge from that understanding. Seneca's teachings offer us permission to be both ambitious and accepting, both engaged with the world and at peace with whatever outcomes arise from our engagement. His philosophy whispers to us across the centuries that we are enough exactly as we are, while simultaneously inspiring us to continue growing into who we might become. It suggests that happiness isn't a destination we reach through perfect circumstances, but a way of traveling that we can cultivate regardless of where the path leads. Most importantly, for those of us seeking rest and restoration, his wisdom reminds us that peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of an inner anchor that holds steady no matter how rough the waters become. So as we prepare to dive deeper into specific aspects of his teaching, Let yourself settle even more fully into this moment. Feel the support of whatever surface you're resting on. Notice the rhythm of your breathing as it naturally slows and deepens. Allow your shoulders to release any tension they might be carrying from the day. You are exactly where you need to be, exploring ideas that have comforted countless generations before you and will continue offering their gentle wisdom long after tonight's conversation ends. Let's begin with one of Seneca's most gentle yet transformative insights: the art of morning reflection. Each dawn, he suggested, offers us a quiet moment to set our intentions not for grand achievements or perfect outcomes, but simply for how we wish to show up in the world. This isn't about creating pressure or unrealistic expectations. It's more like tuning an instrument before playing music, ensuring that whatever melodies the day brings, we'll be prepared to play our part with as much harmony as possible. Seneca wrote to Lucilius about greeting each morning as if it were both the first and last day of your life. First, because every sunrise brings fresh possibilities for small acts of wisdom, kindness, or courage. Last, because recognizing the temporary nature of all things helps us appreciate what we might otherwise take for granted. This dual perspective creates a beautiful balance between hope and acceptance, between engagement and detachment. He didn't recommend spending hours in elaborate morning rituals or complex meditation practices. Instead, he suggested something more accessible, something you could do even now as you listen. Simply take a moment to acknowledge that today, like every day, will contain both joys and challenges. Both will pass. Both have something to teach. Both are temporary visitors in the ongoing story of your life. This morning practice naturally flows into one of Seneca's most soothing teachings about the nature of time itself. We often torture ourselves with time, don't we? Rushing through present moments to reach some imagined future satisfaction, or dwelling in past experiences that exist now only in memory. Seneca observed that we suffer most not from what's actually happening, but from our mental travels away from what's actually happening. He wrote beautifully about time as a river. We cannot step into the same moment twice, just as we cannot step into the same river twice. The water that touched our feet yesterday has already flowed past, joined by new water, carrying different minerals, reflecting different light. Today's worries are not yesterday's worries, even when they seem identical. Today's joys are not tomorrow's joys, even when we hope they'll return. Each moment is genuinely unique, deserving of our full presence rather than our distracted attention. This understanding of time's flow offers profound comfort when we're struggling with difficult emotions or circumstances. Seneca reminds us that this too shall pass is not just a platitude, but a fundamental truth about the nature of existence. The argument that's causing you stress today will resolve. The disappointment that feels overwhelming this week will soften. The physical discomfort that's disrupting your sleep tonight will shift and change. Nothing in the human experience remains static forever. But Seneca's wisdom about time works both ways, and this is where his teaching becomes even more beautiful. If painful experiences are temporary, so are pleasurable ones. This might initially sound discouraging, but Seneca saw it as profoundly liberating. When we truly understand that both pleasure and pain are temporary visitors, we can enjoy the pleasant experiences more fully because we're not desperately trying to make them permanent. We can endure the unpleasant experiences more gracefully because we know they're not permanent either. This leads us to one of his most practical teachings, what he called the discipline of desire. So much of our suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are. We want people to behave differently, whether to cooperate with our plans, our bodies to feel stronger, our minds to be clearer, our circumstances to align more perfectly with our preferences. Seneca didn't suggest that we stop having preferences or stop working toward positive changes. He suggested something more subtle and ultimately more powerful. The discipline of desire involves learning to hold our preferences lightly, like holding a bird that might fly away at any moment. If we grip too tightly, we hurt both the bird and ourselves. If we hold gently, we can appreciate the bird's presence while remaining at peace if it chooses to leave. Our desires, Seneca taught, work the same way. We can work toward what we hope for while remaining inwardly free from desperate attachment to specific outcomes. This might sound abstract, but it has immediate practical applications for anyone seeking better sleep and deeper peace. How often do we lie awake at night, rehearsing conversations we wish had gone differently, or planning elaborate strategies to control situations that are largely beyond our influence? How much energy do we spend fighting against realities that have already occurred, or worrying about possibilities that may never materialize? Seneca's approach offers a different path. Instead of exhausting ourselves in battles we cannot win, we can learn to direct our energy toward the responses we can actually control. We cannot control whether other people approve of our choices, but we can control whether we make choices that align with our values. We cannot control whether our efforts succeed in exactly the way we envision, but we can control whether we bring our best efforts to whatever we undertake. We cannot control whether life unfolds according to our timeline, but we can control how we respond to whatever timeline life provides. This shift in focus from outcomes to responses creates what Seneca called inner citadel, a place of refuge that exists within you regardless of external circumstances. Think of it as a quiet room in your mind where you can always retreat when the world becomes overwhelming. This room isn't furnished with denial or false optimism. It's furnished with perspective, acceptance, and the kind of strength that comes from knowing what you can and cannot influence. Building this inner citadel doesn't happen overnight, and Seneca was refreshingly honest about this. He wrote about his own struggles with anger, anxiety, and the human tendency to create unnecessary suffering through resistance to reality. His letters to Lucilius often begin with admissions of his own failures to live up to his philosophical ideals. But rather than seeing these failures as evidence that the philosophy doesn't work, he saw them as proof that he was human and that the practice was worth continuing. This brings us to one of Seneca's most comforting insights about progress itself. We often imagine that growth should be linear, that each day should bring clear improvement, that setbacks represent failure rather than natural parts of the learning process. Seneca understood something different. Growth, he observed, happens in spirals rather than straight lines. We revisit the same challenges at different levels of understanding. We practice the same skills in increasingly complex circumstances. We return to familiar struggles with gradually deepening wisdom. This spiral understanding of progress removes the pressure to get everything right immediately. It allows for bad days, difficult seasons, and the very human experience of sometimes feeling like you're moving backwards, even when you're actually moving forward. Seneca wrote that even experienced sailors sometimes get seasick. Even skilled musicians sometimes hit wrong notes. Even wise people sometimes act foolishly. The goal isn't perfection, but rather a gentle persistence in practicing the skills that serve us well. What are these skills that Seneca considered most essential? The ability to pause before reacting, to breathe space between trigger and response, the capacity to see situations from multiple perspectives rather than being trapped in our initial emotional reactions, the wisdom to distinguish between what we can influence and what we cannot, the courage to act on our values even when it's difficult, the compassion to treat ourselves and others with kindness during inevitable moments of struggle or failure. These skills, Seneca suggested, are like tools in a craftsperson's workshop. We don't expect to master them immediately, and we don't use the same tool for every job. Sometimes we need the hammer of decisive action. Sometimes we need the gentle file of patient refinement. Sometimes we need the measuring tape of careful assessment before we proceed. The wise person learns not just to collect these tools, but to develop the judgment to know which tool serves best in each situation. Tonight, let's explore one of Seneca's most gentle yet profound teachings, what he called the art of voluntary discomfort. This might sound counterintuitive when we're seeking rest and peace, but bear with me as we discover how this practice can actually deepen our capacity for contentment and tranquility. Seneca wasn't advocating for unnecessary suffering or harsh self-punishment. Instead, he recognized something subtle about human nature. When we become too comfortable, too insulated from any form of difficulty, we often become more anxious about losing what we have. We develop what he called a fragility of spirit, where even small inconveniences feel overwhelming because we've lost practice in adapting to discomfort. His solution was beautifully simple. Occasionally, voluntarily choose small discomforts. Sleep on the floor once in a while. Skip a meal when you're not truly hungry. Take a cold shower. Walk in the rain without an umbrella. These aren't acts of masochism, but exercises in resilience, gentle reminders that you can handle more than you think you can. This practice serves several purposes that contribute to deeper peace. First, it builds confidence in your ability to adapt. When you voluntarily choose temporary discomfort and discover that you not only survive, but can even find it interesting or refreshing, you develop trust in your own resilience. This trust becomes a foundation for peace because you spend less energy worrying about potential hardships. Second, voluntary discomfort enhances your appreciation for ordinary comforts. After sleeping on the floor, your regular bed feels like a luxury. After walking in cold rain, a warm, dry room feels like paradise. Seneca understood that gratitude isn't just a nice idea, but a practical skill that can be cultivated through contrast. When we occasionally step away from our usual comforts, we return to them with fresh eyes and deeper appreciation. Third, this practice helps us distinguish between genuine needs and mere preferences. So much of our stress comes from treating preferences as if they were survival requirements. We think we need the perfect temperature, the ideal schedule, everyone's approval, circumstances to align exactly with our expectations. Voluntary discomfort helps us recognize that while these things might be pleasant, we can be genuinely okay without them. Seneca wrote about this practice not as a grim duty, but as a kind of play, an experiment in discovering your own strength and adaptability. He suggested approaching it with curiosity rather than dread. What happens when you deliberately choose the less comfortable option? What do you learn about your assumptions, your habits, your capacity to find peace in unexpected places? This leads us naturally to one of Seneca's most soothing teachings about anger and irritation. He understood that anger is often just frustrated desire wearing a different costume. We become angry when reality doesn't match our expectations, when people don't behave as we think they should, when circumstances don't unfold according to our timeline. Seneca's approach to anger wasn't to suppress it or pretend it doesn't exist. He recognized anger as a natural human emotion that contains important information. The feeling itself isn't the problem. The problem comes when we let anger drive our actions without first understanding what it's trying to tell us. He suggested treating anger like a messenger knocking at your door. You don't have to invite the messenger in for dinner or let them redecorate your house. But you might want to listen to the message they're carrying. What expectation was frustrated? What boundary was crossed? What value feels threatened? Once you understand the message, you can respond more skillfully than if you simply react from the heat of the emotion. This approach transforms anger from an overwhelming force into useful information. Instead of being swept away by irritation when someone cuts you off in traffic, you might notice that your expectation of courteous driving was frustrated. Instead of being consumed by rage when a project doesn't go as planned, you might recognize that your desire for control was challenged. The situation remains the same, but your relationship to it becomes much more manageable. Seneca also wrote beautifully about what he called the premeditation of evils, though this sounds much more ominous than the actual practice. This isn't about dwelling on worst-case scenarios or cultivating pessimism. It's about occasionally imagining how you would respond if you lost something you value, not to create anxiety, but to reduce attachment and increase appreciation. For a few moments before sleep, you might imagine how you would adapt if you lost your job, if a relationship ended, if your health changed, if you had to move to a different place. Not to worry about these possibilities, but to recognize that you would find ways to adapt, that your essential well-being doesn't depend entirely on maintaining current circumstances exactly as they are. This practice serves as a kind of insurance for your peace of mind. When we've already considered how we might respond to various challenges, we're less likely to be overwhelmed if they actually occur. We've already planted seeds of adaptability in our imagination. More importantly, having considered these possibilities makes us more grateful for present blessings while they're available. Seneca understood that much of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to events, our insistence that things should be different than they are. This resistance creates what he called a double burden. First, we experience whatever difficult situation has arisen. Second, we exhaust ourselves fighting against the reality of that situation. His alternative was what we might call graceful acceptance, though this requires careful understanding to avoid confusion with passive resignation. Graceful acceptance doesn't mean approving of everything that happens or abandoning efforts to create positive change. It means acknowledging reality as the starting point for any effective response. If you're stuck in traffic, graceful acceptance means acknowledging that you are, in fact, stuck in traffic rather than spending energy being angry about something you cannot change. From this acceptance, you might choose to listen to music, practice breathing exercises, or use the time for reflection. If a relationship is struggling, graceful acceptance means acknowledging the current difficulties, rather than pretending they don't exist, or demanding that the other person change immediately. This kind of acceptance actually increases your power to respond effectively because you're working with reality rather than against it. It's like learning to sail with the wind rather than fighting against it. You can still choose your direction, but you work with the forces available rather than exhausting yourself in futile battles. Seneca's teachings about acceptance extend to our relationship with our own minds and emotions. He recognized that we often treat our thoughts and feelings like unwelcome intruders, trying to push away anything unpleasant or cling desperately to anything pleasant. This internal warfare creates enormous stress and rarely produces the mental state we're trying to achieve. Instead, he suggested treating thoughts and emotions more like weather patterns. Clouds form, move across the sky, and eventually dissipate. Storms arise, create intensity for a while, then pass. Sunny periods bring warmth and clarity, then give way to other conditions. None of these weather patterns are permanent, and fighting against them doesn't change them any faster than they would change naturally. This meteorological approach to mental states offers profound relief for anyone who struggles with anxiety, sadness, or other challenging emotions. Instead of adding the stress of resistance to the stress of the original emotion, you can observe what's happening with compassionate curiosity. What thoughts are arising? What sensations are present? What stories is your mind telling about the situation? Seneca wrote that this kind of self-observation, practiced gently over time, naturally creates space between you and your immediate emotional reactions. You begin to notice that you are not your emotions any more than you are the weather outside your window. You can experience emotions, learn from them, respond to them skillfully, without being completely identified with them or controlled by them. This space between self and emotion becomes a source of tremendous freedom. When you're angry, you can notice anger without becoming anger. When you're worried, you can observe worry without becoming worry. When you're sad, you can feel sadness without losing yourself in sadness. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. It means developing what Seneca called the philosopher's mind, a perspective that can hold all experiences with wisdom and compassion. From this spacious perspective, Seneca suggested, we can begin to see our challenges as opportunities for practicing virtue. Not because challenges are good in themselves, but because they provide circumstances for developing qualities we value. Patience can only be practiced when we're tempted to be impatient. Courage can only be exercised when we feel afraid. Compassion deepens through encounters with suffering, both our own and others. This reframing doesn't minimize the reality of difficult experiences, but it offers a way to find meaning and growth within them. Instead of seeing obstacles as evidence that life is unfair or that we're unlucky, we can begin to see them as a natural part of human curriculum, opportunities to strengthen qualities that serve us well in all circumstances. Seneca's letters often return to the theme of death, not morbidly, but as a way of clarifying what matters most. He called this practice memento mori, remembering that life is temporary. This remembrance, he suggested, helps us waste less time on trivial concerns and invest more energy in what genuinely matters. When we remember that our time here is limited, we become more selective about how we spend our attention and energy. We're less likely to hold grudges over small slights, less likely to postpone important conversations, less likely to take our relationships and opportunities for granted. This awareness of mortality paradoxically makes life richer rather than sadder, more urgent in the best sense. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you might experiment with this gentle remembrance, not to create anxiety about time passing, but to feel gratitude for this moment of rest, this opportunity to learn, this breath you're taking right now. Tomorrow is not guaranteed, which makes tonight precious. This conversation between us across time and space is temporary, which makes it beautiful. Seneca understood that philosophy at its best doesn't just inform our thinking, but transforms our daily experience. His teachings weren't meant to be admired from a distance, but practiced in the ordinary moments that make up most of life. Waiting in line at the store becomes an opportunity to practice patience. Receiving criticism becomes a chance to practice responding rather than reacting. Experiencing success becomes a moment to practice gratitude without attachment. This integration of wisdom into daily life creates what Seneca called the philosophical life, not in the sense of academic study, but in the sense of living with conscious attention to what serves our deepest well-being and the well-being of those around us. It's a life characterized by presence rather than distraction, by response rather than reaction, by acceptance of what cannot be changed, and skillful action toward what can be influenced. As we continue exploring his gentle wisdom, notice how these teachings don't demand dramatic changes or perfect implementation. They invite us into a different relationship with our own experience, a relationship marked by curiosity, compassion, and the kind of patient persistence that allows transformation to unfold naturally, like seeds growing in well-tended soil. As we settle deeper into Seneca's teachings, let's explore one of his most tender observations about human connection and solitude. He wrote extensively about friendship, not as mere social pleasantry, but as one of life's most essential nutrients. Yet he also understood the profound importance of learning to be genuinely comfortable in our own company. This balance between connection and solitude forms a gentle rhythm that can bring deep contentment to our days and peaceful rest to our nights. Seneca believed that true friendship wasn't about having someone available whenever loneliness strikes, but about cultivating relationships where both people can be authentically themselves without performance or pretense. He wrote to Lucilius about the relief of being known fully by another person, of having someone who sees your struggles and strengths with equal clarity and accepts both without judgment. This kind of friendship, Seneca observed, actually makes us better at being alone. When we know we are truly seen and valued by someone, we carry that warmth with us even during solitary moments. Conversely, when we're comfortable with our own thoughts and feelings, we bring a more centered presence to our relationships. We're less likely to burden friends with the desperate need for constant validation and more likely to offer the steady support that authentic friendship requires. But what about those times when friendship feels distant or unavailable? Seneca had gentle wisdom for these seasons too. He suggested treating solitude as an opportunity for the deepest kind of friendship, the one we develop with ourselves. This doesn't mean endless self-analysis or harsh internal criticism. It means learning to be a good companion to your own mind and heart. Being a good companion to yourself involves the same qualities you'd offer a dear friend. When you make a mistake, you might respond with curiosity rather than condemnation. When you're struggling with a decision, you might listen to your own concerns with patience rather than dismissing them impatiently. When you're feeling overwhelmed, you might offer yourself the same gentleness you'd extend to someone you care about. Seneca wrote that this internal friendship creates a kind of portable peace. When you know how to be genuinely good company for yourself, external circumstances have less power to disturb your equilibrium. You're not constantly seeking distraction from your own thoughts, because those thoughts have become interesting rather than threatening. You're not desperately avoiding quiet moments, because quiet moments have become nourishing rather than uncomfortable. This leads us to one of Seneca's most practical teachings about dealing with the endless stream of small annoyances that can accumulate throughout our days. the delayed train, the rude comment, the technology that doesn't work properly, the weather that doesn't cooperate with our plans. These minor irritations, he observed, often cause more stress than major crises because we don't prepare for them psychologically. Seneca's approach was beautifully simple. He suggested beginning each day with the assumption that something would go wrong, not because he was pessimistic, but because he was realistic. When we expect perfect days, every small deviation feels like a personal affront. When we expect the ordinary mixture of smooth and bumpy moments that actually characterizes most days, we can respond to difficulties with equanimity rather than outrage. This expectation of imperfection paradoxically makes life more pleasant, not less. When the train arrives on time, it feels like a gift rather than an entitlement. When people are kind, their kindness stands out more clearly against our realistic understanding that not everyone will be having a good day. When technology works smoothly, we appreciate the convenience rather than taking it for granted. Seneca also wrote beautifully about what he called the discipline of assent, learning to examine our immediate judgments about situations before accepting them as truth. So often, our first interpretation of events creates unnecessary suffering. Someone doesn't return our message quickly, and we decide they're angry with us. A project doesn't succeed as we hoped, and we conclude we're failures. A physical sensation arises, and we assume something terrible is wrong. The discipline of assent involves pausing between perception and conclusion, creating space for more nuanced understanding. Maybe the person who didn't respond is simply busy. Maybe the project that didn't succeed taught us something valuable for next time. Maybe the physical sensation is just information about what our body needs, rather than evidence of impending doom. This pause between stimulus and interpretation becomes a source of tremendous freedom. Instead of being yanked around by our immediate emotional reactions to events, we can choose our responses more consciously. We can ask ourselves what story we're telling about what happened, whether that story serves us well, and what other stories might be equally valid. Seneca understood that this kind of mental flexibility requires practice, like learning to play an instrument or developing physical strength. We don't expect to master it immediately, and we don't berate ourselves when we forget to use it. We simply notice when we've been caught up in unhelpful interpretations, gently redirect our attention, and continue practicing. One of the most soothing aspects of Seneca's philosophy is his understanding that wisdom isn't about reaching some final state of enlightenment where we never feel confused, frustrated, or afraid again. Wisdom, for Seneca, was more like developing skill in navigation. We don't eliminate storms by becoming better sailors, but we do learn to navigate storms more gracefully. This understanding removes the pressure to achieve some impossible standard of perpetual calm. Instead, it invites us to become more skilled in working with whatever weather patterns arise in our inner and outer lives. Sometimes the sailing is smooth and pleasant. Sometimes we need all our skills to navigate safely through rough waters. Both conditions are natural parts of the journey. Seneca wrote extensively about the relationship between pleasure and happiness, making distinctions that can bring great relief to anyone who's ever felt guilty about enjoying simple pleasures or confused about why achieving goals doesn't always bring lasting satisfaction. He wasn't a ascetic who believed all pleasure was dangerous, nor was he a hedonist who believed pleasure was the highest good. Instead, he saw pleasure as one color in the palette of human experience, beautiful when used skillfully, but problematic when it becomes the only color we know how to use. A warm bath can be genuinely delightful without being essential for happiness. A good meal can bring real satisfaction without becoming an obsession. Time with loved ones can create wonderful memories without becoming desperate attachment. This balanced approach to pleasure allows us to enjoy good things while they're available without becoming anxious about losing them or depressed when they end. We can appreciate beauty without grasping at it, experience joy without demanding that it last forever, receive gifts without feeling entitled to constant generosity. Seneca's letters often touch on what we might call the art of graceful receiving. He noticed that many people struggle not just with giving, but with allowing themselves to accept kindness, help, or good fortune when they arise. This difficulty in receiving, he observed, actually limits our capacity for generosity because we're modeling a world where everyone must be completely self-sufficient. Learning to receive gracefully, whether it's a compliment, an offer of help, or an unexpected opportunity, creates space for others to experience the joy of giving. It also acknowledges the fundamental interdependence that characterizes human life. None of us creates our own food, builds our own roads, or generates our own oxygen. We're all constantly receiving gifts from nature and from each other's labor and creativity. This recognition of interdependence naturally cultivates humility and gratitude. When we see how much we receive every day just to maintain our basic existence, it becomes easier to feel appreciative rather than entitled, connected rather than isolated, fortunate rather than deprived. Seneca also wrote with great tenderness about aging and the changes that time brings to our bodies, our minds, and our circumstances. Rather than seeing aging as defeat or decline, he saw it as a natural process that could deepen wisdom if approached with acceptance rather than resistance. Each stage of life, he suggested, has its own gifts and its own challenges. Youth brings energy and possibility, but often lacks perspective and patience. Middle age might bring competence and confidence, but sometimes creates pressure and responsibility. Later years might bring physical limitations, but often offer the freedom that comes from having less to prove and more capacity for appreciation. Instead of spending energy mourning what each stage takes away, Seneca invited us to explore what each stage makes possible. What can you appreciate now that you couldn't appreciate when you were younger? What wisdom have you gained from experiences that once felt purely difficult? What freedoms do your current circumstances create, even if they also involve certain limitations? This perspective transforms aging from something that happens to us into something we participate in consciously. We can't control the passage of time, but we can influence how we relate to the changes time brings. We can cultivate the qualities that tend to improve with age, wisdom, patience, perspective, gratitude, while accepting the changes that are simply part of being human in a physical body. As the night deepens around you, notice how Seneca's teachings don't ask you to become someone different, but rather invite you to become more fully yourself. They don't promise to eliminate life's challenges, but offer tools for meeting those challenges with greater grace. They don't guarantee perpetual happiness, but point toward a deeper contentment that can coexist with the full range of human experience. Tonight, let these ancient words settle into your awareness like gentle rain on thirsty soil. You don't need to implement everything immediately or remember every insight perfectly. Simply allow yourself to be touched by the possibility that peace doesn't require perfect circumstances, that wisdom doesn't require perfect understanding, and that contentment doesn't require perfect control over the uncontrollable currents of existence. Seneca's voice reaches across 2,000 years, not because his life was without struggle, but because his struggles taught him something valuable about the human capacity for resilience, growth, and grace. His letters continue to comfort readers because they were written by someone who understood both suffering and joy, both doubt and confidence, both the desire for control and the peace that comes from learning when to let go. As your breathing continues to slow and deepen, as your body settles more completely into rest, carry with you this gentle reminder from one of history's most compassionate philosophers. You are stronger than you know, wiser than you believe, and more capable of peace than your worried thoughts might suggest. The same forces that shaped stars and mountains and oceans also live within you, patient and enduring, ready to support you through whatever tomorrow might bring. Rest assured that tomorrow will bring its own mixture of opportunities and challenges, and that you already possess everything necessary to meet them with dignity. Seneca understood that strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to remain open-hearted even when life feels uncertain. One of his most gentle teachings concerned what he called the therapy of attention. So much of our suffering, he observed, comes not from present circumstances, but from the stories our minds tell about those circumstances. We replay past conversations, searching for different outcomes. We rehearse future scenarios, trying to control variables that haven't yet materialized. Meanwhile, the actual moment, where life is genuinely happening, slips by largely unnoticed. Seneca wasn't suggesting that planning is useless or that reflecting on experience serves no purpose. He was pointing towards something more subtle. When planning becomes anxiety about controlling the uncontrollable, it stops serving us. When reflection becomes rumination that keeps us trapped in regret or resentment, it stops nourishing wisdom and starts feeding suffering instead. The therapy of attention involves gently returning awareness to what's actually present. Right now, you're listening to these words while your body rests in whatever position feels most comfortable. Your breathing is happening automatically, requiring no effort or management from your conscious mind. Somewhere nearby, there might be sounds of settling buildings, distant traffic, or natural quiet. These simple realities anchor you in the present moment, offering refuge from the mental time travel that creates so much unnecessary stress. Seneca wrote that this kind of present moment awareness isn't an escape from responsibility, but a foundation for more effective action. When we're fully present to current circumstances, we can respond more skillfully than when we're partially distracted by mental commentary about how things should be different. A conversation goes better when we're actually listening rather than preparing our next response. A task gets completed more efficiently when we're focused on what we're doing rather than worried about everything else that needs doing. This presence of mind also transforms our relationship with pleasure and pain. Instead of constantly evaluating experiences as good or bad, we can simply notice what's happening with curious attention. The warmth of sunlight through a window becomes interesting rather than something we desperately try to make permanent. The discomfort of a difficult conversation becomes workable rather than something we must avoid at all costs. Seneca understood that this shift from evaluation to observation requires patience and practice. Our minds are naturally inclined to categorize, judge, and react. These tendencies served our ancestors well when quick assessments meant survival. But in our current environment, where most challenges don't require immediate fight or flight responses, these same tendencies often create stress about situations that would be manageable if we could approach them with calm attention. He suggested treating the mind like a young animal that needs gentle training rather than harsh discipline. When you notice your thoughts racing toward worry about tomorrow's responsibilities, you might simply acknowledge where your mind has traveled and gently guide attention back to your current breathing. When you catch yourself replaying today's difficulties, you might notice the mental habit without criticism and redirect awareness toward present sensations. This kind of mental training creates what Seneca called philosophical leisure. Not the leisure of having nothing to do, but the leisure of being fully present to whatever you're doing. Whether you're washing dishes, walking to the store, or lying in bed preparing for sleep, philosophical leisure transforms routine activities into opportunities for peaceful attention. From this grounded presence, Seneca taught, we can begin to see our problems in proper proportion. The crisis that feels overwhelming when we're caught up in mental drama often becomes manageable when we step back and assess what actually needs attention right now, today, in this moment. Most of our problems exist primarily in our imagination of possible futures or our interpretation of past events. The problems that exist in present reality are usually smaller and more workable than the problems we create through anxious thinking. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine challenges or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It means distinguishing between productive concern that leads to helpful action and unproductive worry that simply drains energy without solving anything. Productive concern might involve making a doctor's appointment when you notice concerning symptoms. Unproductive worry involves spending hours imagining worst-case scenarios about what those symptoms might mean. Seneca also wrote extensively about what he called the discipline of action, learning to engage with the world wholeheartedly while holding outcomes lightly. This might seem contradictory at first. How can we act with full commitment while remaining detached from results? But Seneca understood something subtle about the relationship between effort and attachment. When we're attached to specific outcomes, we often second-guess our actions, hesitate when decisiveness would serve us better, or become so focused on results that we lose sight of the process. Paradoxically, this attachment to outcomes often makes us less effective at achieving them. When we can commit fully to our efforts while accepting that results depend on many factors beyond our control, we often perform better and suffer less regardless of what happens. This principle applies beautifully to the challenge of falling asleep. The harder we try to force sleep, the more elusive it becomes. But when we can rest comfortably while allowing sleep to arrive naturally, we create conditions where rest becomes possible. The same principle works with many aspects of life. The conversation we desperately need to go perfectly often becomes stilted by our anxiety about its outcome. The project we're determined to make flawless sometimes suffers from our inability to accept good enough. Seneca's approach suggests bringing our best efforts to whatever we undertake, while recognizing that the results will emerge from a complex interaction of our efforts, other people's choices, circumstances beyond anyone's control, and timing that rarely aligns perfectly with our preferences. This recognition frees us to focus on what we can actually influence, our own preparation, attention, and responses, rather than exhausting ourselves trying to control variables that remain stubbornly beyond our reach. One of his most comforting insights concerned the nature of security. We often imagine that security comes from accumulating enough resources, achieving enough success, or building enough safeguards to protect ourselves from all possible threats. Seneca observed that this kind of security remains forever out of reach because there's no amount of external protection that can eliminate all risk from human existence. True security, he suggested, comes not from eliminating all threats, but from developing confidence in our ability to adapt to whatever circumstances arise. This internal security grows through experience, through surviving difficulties we didn't think we could handle, through discovering that we're more resilient than we imagined, through learning that we can find meaning and even joy in situations that initially seemed purely challenging. This shift from external to internal security transforms our relationship with uncertainty. Instead of seeing unpredictability as a threat to be eliminated, we can begin to see it as a natural condition that keeps life interesting. Instead of spending enormous energy trying to control what cannot be controlled, we can invest that same energy in developing the flexibility and wisdom that serve us well, regardless of what unfolds. Seneca wrote that this kind of internal security creates what he called tranquility, not the absence of activity or challenge, but a steadiness of spirit that remains relatively calm regardless of external turbulence. Like a deep lake that remains peaceful even when surface winds create waves, tranquility allows us to maintain perspective even when circumstances become temporarily chaotic. This tranquility isn't something we achieve once and then possess permanently. It's more like a skill we develop gradually through practice, sometimes accessing it easily, sometimes struggling to remember it exists. Seneca was honest about his own fluctuations between wisdom and confusion, between clarity and doubt. He didn't present himself as someone who had transcended human limitations, but as someone who had learned to work more skillfully with those limitations. His letters often describe moments when he forgot his own philosophical principles, became caught up in anger or worry, and had to consciously remember and reapply insights he thought he had already integrated. This honesty makes his teachings more accessible and less intimidating. We don't need to become perfect practitioners before we can benefit from philosophical wisdom. We simply need to be willing to keep practicing, keep learning, keep returning to principles that serve us well, even when we temporarily forget to use them. As the night continues to deepen around you, notice how Seneca's wisdom doesn't demand immediate transformation, but invites gradual cultivation of qualities that already exist within you. The capacity for patience, for perspective, for accepting what cannot be changed, while working skillfully with what can be influenced. These aren't foreign concepts you must import from outside, but natural human capacities that can be strengthened through gentle, consistent attention. His teachings remind us that we don't need to wait for perfect circumstances to begin practicing wisdom. This moment, exactly as it is, with whatever thoughts are arising, whatever emotions are present, whatever concerns are lingering from the day, this moment offers everything necessary for taking the next small step toward greater peace and clarity. The ancient Stoic understood that philosophy at its best doesn't separate us from ordinary human experience, but helps us engage with that experience more gracefully. The goal isn't to transcend our humanity, but to express it more fully, with greater kindness toward ourselves and others, greater appreciation for what we've been given, and greater courage to face whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow might bring. Tonight, as your body settles into the restorative rhythms of approaching sleep, carry with you this gentle invitation from across the centuries. You are exactly where you need to be in your own journey of learning and growth. The struggles that feel overwhelming today are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. The wisdom that feels just beyond your reach is actually already present within you, waiting patiently for quiet moments like this one to make itself known. Seneca's voice continues to whisper comfort through the ages because he understood something essential about the human experience. We are all walking each other home through the uncertain landscape of existence. None of us knows exactly what tomorrow will bring, but we can choose to meet it with as much grace, courage, and compassion as we can muster. And on the days when grace feels elusive, when courage wavers, when compassion seems impossible, we can remember that these too are natural parts of the human journey, deserving of patience rather than judgment. The same forces that have carried countless generations through their own challenges and celebrations continue to flow through this moment, supporting you as you rest, learn, and prepare for whatever adventures await. In the gentle rhythm of your breathing, in the quiet comfort of your chosen resting place, in the simple miracle of awareness itself, ancient wisdom meets present peace, creating a bridge between what was, what is, and what might yet unfold with beauty and meaning. Rest settles more deeply into your awareness now, like morning mist gathering in quiet valleys. Let's turn our attention to one of Seneca's most profound yet gentle teachings, what he called the art of inner weather. He observed that just as external weather patterns move through predictable cycles, our internal experiences follow similar rhythms of expansion and contraction, clarity and confusion, energy and rest. Seneca wrote that most people treat their changing moods and mental states as personal failures rather than natural phenomena. When we feel anxious, we often become anxious about being anxious. When sadness arises, we compound it with judgment about why we should feel differently. When energy feels low, we criticize ourselves for not being more productive. This resistance to our own natural fluctuations creates what he called a second suffering layered on top of whatever we're actually experiencing. His approach was refreshingly different. He suggested observing our internal weather with the same curious detachment we might bring to watching clouds form and dissolve in the sky. Anxiety arrives like a sudden storm, intense but temporary. Sadness moves through like gentle rain, nourishing something we can't always see immediately. Joy breaks through like unexpected sunlight, warming everything it touches before naturally giving way to other conditions. This meteorological perspective on emotions creates tremendous relief. Instead of trying to maintain permanent sunshine in our inner landscape, we can learn to appreciate the full spectrum of atmospheric conditions. Some days bring the crisp clarity of autumn air, perfect for making decisions and taking action. Other days arrive wrapped in soft fog, ideal for rest and reflection. Neither condition is wrong or problematic. Both serve purposes in the larger ecosystem of human experience. Seneca understood that this acceptance of emotional weather doesn't mean becoming passive about our inner lives. A wise farmer doesn't try to control the weather, but they do learn to work skillfully with whatever conditions arise. During dry seasons, they conserve water and plant drought-resistant crops. During rainy periods, they focus on tasks that can be done indoors. They adapt their activities to match the natural rhythms, rather than exhausting themselves fighting against conditions they cannot change. We can apply this same agricultural wisdom to our daily emotional landscape. During periods of high energy and clarity, we might tackle challenging projects or difficult conversations. During times of lower energy or emotional complexity, we might focus on gentler activities like reading, listening to music, or spending quiet time in nature. This isn't laziness or avoidance. It's intelligent adaptation to the natural rhythms that govern human experience. This brings us to one of Seneca's most comforting insights about what he called the democracy of difficulty. He noticed that suffering often feels intensely personal, as if we're being singled out for particularly unfair treatment. When we're struggling with health problems, relationship challenges, financial stress, or any other form of hardship, it's natural to wonder why these things are happening to us specifically. Seneca's perspective was both humbling and oddly consoling. He observed that difficulty is distributed remarkably democratically across human experience. Rich and poor, young and old, famous and unknown, all encounter their share of challenges. The specific forms vary, but the essential experience of facing obstacles, disappointments, and losses touches every human life without exception. This doesn't minimize the reality of individual suffering or suggest that all problems are equivalent. It does offer a different context for understanding our own difficulties. Instead of seeing our challenges as evidence that life is particularly unfair to us, we can recognize them as part of the universal curriculum that shapes human character and wisdom. Everyone gets enrolled in this school. Everyone faces tests they didn't choose and wouldn't have designed for themselves. Understanding the democracy of difficulty naturally cultivates what Seneca called sympathetic imagination. The ability to recognize that everyone we encounter is carrying burdens we cannot see. The person who seems to have everything together might be struggling with hidden health issues. The individual who appears confident and successful might be dealing with family problems or inner doubts. The stranger who seems irritated or impatient might be facing challenges that would test anyone's equanimity. This recognition doesn't excuse harmful behavior or suggest we should tolerate mistreatment. It simply reminds us that behavior often reflects circumstances we cannot perceive. The colleague who seems particularly difficult might be going through a divorce. The friend who has become distant might be dealing with depression. The family member who seems critical might be struggling with their own insecurities. When we remember that everyone is fighting battles we cannot see, interactions become opportunities for compassion rather than judgment. We might offer a little more patience to someone who seems stressed, a little more kindness to someone who appears lonely, a little more understanding to someone who seems overwhelmed. These small gestures rarely cost us much, but can make surprising differences in both our experience and theirs. Seneca also wrote extensively about what he called the practice of philosophical death, though this sounds much more morbid than the actual teaching. He wasn't advocating for dwelling on mortality in a depressing way, but rather using awareness of life's temporary nature as a lens for clarifying what genuinely matters. When we remember that our time here is limited, many of our daily concerns naturally fall into better perspective. The argument with your spouse about whose turn it is to take out the trash matters less when you remember that someday one of you will no longer be here to share household responsibilities. The frustration about a delayed flight feels smaller when you consider that being able to travel at all is a temporary privilege. The disappointment about a canceled plan becomes more manageable when you recognize that having plans to cancel indicates a life rich with possibilities. This awareness of impermanence isn't meant to make us sad or anxious about losing what we have. Instead, it's designed to help us appreciate present experiences more fully. The morning coffee tastes richer when we remember that we won't drink infinite cups. The conversation with a friend feels more precious When we acknowledge that our time together is limited, the sunset becomes more beautiful when we recognize that we'll only witness a finite number of them. Seneca suggested treating each day as both ordinary and extraordinary, routine and irreplaceable. This paradoxical awareness prevents us from taking good things for granted, while also preventing us from clinging so tightly to pleasant experiences that we can't enjoy them. It's like holding a flower, appreciating its beauty and fragrance, while knowing that its blooming is temporary, and that this temporariness is part of what makes it precious. From this perspective, loss becomes not just inevitable, but somehow fitting. The sadness we feel when good things end isn't a mistake or failure, but evidence that we were paying attention, that we allowed ourselves to care, that we opened our hearts to experiences knowing they wouldn't last forever. Seneca wrote that grief itself can be a form of gratitude, proof that we received something worth mourning when it ends. This understanding transforms our relationship with attachment. Instead of trying to eliminate all attachment, which would make life emotionally barren, or clinging desperately to attachments, which creates suffering when change occurs, we can learn what Seneca called loving with open hands. We can care deeply while holding lightly, invest fully while accepting that all investments are temporary, love completely while acknowledging that all relationships exist within the context of impermanence. This balanced approach to attachment creates what many people describe as a bittersweet quality to life, a recognition that joy and sadness are often intertwined rather than opposite. The beauty of watching children grow includes the poignancy of watching them change and become independent. The pleasure of achieving goals includes awareness that achievements don't provide permanent satisfaction. The comfort of familiar routines includes recognition that all routines eventually give way to new circumstances. Seneca understood that this bittersweet quality isn't a flaw in the design of existence, but part of its essential texture. Life would be flat without the interplay between permanence and change, security and uncertainty, holding on and letting go. The tension between these polarities creates the dynamic quality that makes human experience rich and meaningful, rather than static and predictable. As the night air grows cooler around you and your breathing continues to slow into the deeper rhythms of approaching sleep, notice how these ancient insights don't require you to change anything immediately. They simply invite you to see your current experience from a slightly different angle, with a little more space, a little more compassion, a little more appreciation for the mysterious process of being human in a world that's constantly changing. Seneca's letters weren't written to convince anyone of particular beliefs, but to share observations that might prove useful during difficult moments. His wisdom works not because it's theoretically perfect, but because it emerges from genuine engagement with the full spectrum of human experience. He wrote about philosophy not as abstract ideas, but as practical tools for navigating the actual challenges that everyone faces. Tonight, you don't need to become a different person, or solve all your problems, or achieve some impossible state of perpetual serenity. You simply need to be present to this moment of rest, this opportunity for renewal, this quiet space where ancient wisdom meets contemporary concerns and offers gentle guidance for whatever tomorrow might bring. The same forces that supported Seneca through his own struggles continue to flow through this moment, supporting you as you release the day's concerns and prepare for sleep's restorative embrace. In the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat, in the natural rise and fall of your breathing, in the simple miracle of consciousness settling into rest, You participate in patterns that have comforted countless generations before you and will continue offering their quiet solace long after tonight's conversation ends. Rest assured that you belong to something larger than your individual concerns, something patient and enduring and fundamentally benevolent, something that holds space for both your struggles and your victories with equal tenderness. The gentle teachings of Seneca flow naturally toward one of his most practical insights, what he called the art of beneficial forgetting. While our culture often emphasizes the importance of remembering everything, Seneca understood that selective forgetting serves as one of the mind's most merciful functions. Just as our bodies naturally heal cuts and bruises, our consciousness possesses an innate ability to soften the sharp edges of painful memories and diminish the hold of past grievances. He wrote extensively about the burden of carrying every slight, every disappointment, every moment of embarrassment like stones in an ever-growing satchel. Most people, he observed, become archaeologists of their own pain, carefully cataloging and preserving injuries that would naturally fade if left undisturbed. We rehearse old arguments until they feel fresh and immediate. We polish grievances until they gleam with renewed indignation. We tend our resentments like gardeners cultivating prize-winning roses. Seneca's approach was refreshingly different. He suggested that forgetting serves as wisdom in action, a conscious choice to release what no longer serves our growth or peace. This doesn't mean denying that painful experiences occurred or pretending that harmful actions were acceptable. It means choosing not to feed old wounds with constant attention, not to refresh faded hurts with repeated mental rehearsal. This practice of beneficial forgetting extends beyond interpersonal relationships to include our own past mistakes and failures. How often do we replay moments of poor judgment, rehearsing different responses we might have chosen, torturing ourselves with perfect hindsight about imperfect decisions? Seneca observed that this mental repetition serves no constructive purpose once we've learned whatever lessons the experience offers. He suggested treating past mistakes like old newspapers, useful for understanding what happened but not worth storing indefinitely. Once you've extracted whatever wisdom a difficult experience contains, you can allow the sharp emotional charge to fade naturally. The facts remain available if needed for practical purposes, but they lose their power to disturb your present peace. This doesn't happen overnight, and Seneca was characteristically honest about the gradual nature of this healing process. Some memories fade quickly, like shallow cuts that heal within days. Others require patient tending over months or years, like deeper wounds that mend slowly but completely when given proper care. The timeline varies, but the direction remains consistent toward integration and peace, rather than perpetual reopening of old injuries. Seneca also wrote beautifully about what he called the practice of generous interpretation. When someone's behavior seems hurtful or thoughtless, we face a choice about how to understand their actions. We can assume the worst possible motives, interpreting ambiguous behavior as evidence of malice or disrespect. Or we can choose interpretations that preserve the possibility of innocent intentions while still protecting our own well-being. This generous interpretation isn't naive or passive. It's a strategic choice based on practical wisdom. When we assume the worst about others' motivations, we carry the emotional burden of that assumption. We walk through the world feeling surrounded by people who wish us harm, which creates stress and defensiveness that affects our health, our relationships, and our overall quality of life. When we choose more generous interpretations where they're reasonably possible, we lighten our own emotional load. The person who didn't return our greeting might be preoccupied with personal concerns rather than deliberately rude. The friend who canceled plans might be dealing with genuine difficulties rather than showing disrespect. The colleague who seemed dismissive might be having a challenging day rather than harboring ill will toward us specifically. This practice requires discernment rather than blanket optimism. Sometimes people do act with harmful intentions, and generous interpretation shouldn't prevent us from recognizing genuine threats or setting appropriate boundaries. But in the vast majority of daily interactions, multiple interpretations are possible, and choosing the more benevolent option usually serves our peace of mind without compromising our safety. Seneca understood that this choice of interpretation reflects and shapes our overall relationship with existence itself. When we habitually assume that life is fundamentally hostile, that people are generally selfish, that circumstances are usually working against us, we create an internal environment of chronic stress and suspicion. This defensive posture, while sometimes necessary for genuine protection, becomes exhausting when maintained unnecessarily. Alternatively, when we can maintain what he called philosophical optimism, a basic trust in life's fundamental benevolence despite its inevitable challenges, we create internal conditions more conducive to peace, creativity, and meaningful connection with others. This optimism isn't denial of life's difficulties, but confidence in our ability to find meaning and growth, even within challenging circumstances. This leads us to one of Seneca's most profound insights about the relationship between acceptance and transformation. Many people believe these are opposing forces, that accepting current circumstances prevents positive change, or that working for improvement requires rejecting present reality. Seneca saw something more nuanced and ultimately more powerful. True acceptance, he suggested, creates the stable foundation from which effective change becomes possible. When we're constantly fighting against current circumstances, most of our energy goes into resistance rather than constructive action. It's like trying to build a house while standing on quicksand. The foundation keeps shifting, making solid construction nearly impossible. When we can accept present circumstances as the starting point for whatever changes we want to create, we have solid ground from which to work. This acceptance doesn't mean approval or resignation. It means acknowledging reality clearly enough to respond skillfully rather than reactively. From this stable foundation, we can assess what actually needs changing, what resources are available for creating change, and what approach might prove most effective given current conditions. Seneca wrote that this combination of acceptance and skillful action creates what he called philosophical effectiveness, the ability to work for positive change without being overwhelmed by attachment to specific outcomes. We can plant seeds of improvement while trusting that growth will happen in its own timing. We can offer our best efforts while remaining at peace if results unfold differently than we expected. This approach transforms activism from desperate struggle into patient cultivation. Instead of exhausting ourselves in battles we cannot win, we focus energy on changes we can actually influence. Instead of becoming discouraged when progress happens slowly, we appreciate each small step forward while maintaining perspective about the longer journey ahead. As the final wisps of consciousness settle into the approaching embrace of sleep, let Seneca's gentle teachings dissolve into the quiet spaces of your mind, like honey stirring into warm tea. His voice reaches across 20 centuries, not with urgent demands for immediate change, but with patient reminders that peace is always available, wisdom is always growing, and rest is always deserved. Tomorrow will bring its own mixture of smooth sailing and choppy waters, and you now carry within you the ancient tools for navigating both with greater grace. Sleep well, knowing that the same forces that guided Roman philosophers through their trials continue to flow through this moment, supporting your rest and renewal